Hello and welcome to another episode of Unmasking Leaders. Today we are delighted to be joined by Destiny Fordham. Hi, Destiny. How are
Hi,
you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. We're good. And obviously, to our listeners, Destiny's from over the pond, as they say, based in Houston, Texas, aren't you?
Yes,
Yes, I thought so. So it's 8 a.m. for you. So you're seizing the day going straight onto a podcast. So thank you for joining us.
of
As a,
course.
as a bit of a background, are you a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager? That's correct, isn't it? And a facilitator.
Yes.
Yep. And through your work, you invite courageous conversations centered around identity to create space for everyone and you dedicate yourself to creating and facilitating DEI training for staff and students all across America. So I guess off that, a great place to start is what inspired you to begin working in this sector, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, so I always tell people, and if you know anyone that knows me from childhood, I've always been this way. So I'm the oldest girl. I have 9 siblings. So I came from a big family, and within that space, I've always had to advocate. So I was always a child growing up that was like asking questions. Like I would get in trouble for to be like, why do we have to go to bed? Why do we have to do this? Why do we have to go here? And so I was always curious about why things were the way they were. And I think that's something that has just always stuck with me. And so, again, as a child, I was very vocal, questioned a lot of things. But then as I started to grow up, it was one of those things where I got into college and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But I landed on sociology and criminal justice as my major. And through that, I was able to participate in marches, protests, and of course, a lot of my curriculum was around the criminal justice system and deviant behavior, crime and punishment. And I always found it fascinating who was deemed a criminal, who was not, who deserved punishment, who did not. I remember there was an activity we had to do for my sociology class where we had to defy like a norm. And so I went into our lunchroom, one of the lunch halls at my university, and I ate on the floor. And I remember my friends were just like, "Oh my God, Destiny, please get up." But I was so fascinated by the way people almost like tried to ignore me, and try to ignore that experience. I was just like, wow, like this was one of those moments where I could see what it looked like to be seen or looked at in a different light and think about how that may impact other people where that is a cultural norm. Um, and so those type of situations I think really prepared me for the role that I'm in now. But one of the things that I always talk about that I always want to make sure that I mention is for me, what happened to Trayvon Martin is something that has always stuck with me. His murder when I was still a very young in my career, and it happened while I was still in college. And so it was one of those things where I was learning about this injustice, I was learning about the system, and I was also in the midst of with the rest of the world experiencing this injustice come to be. As you know, Trayvon Martin was killed, I believe, just walking around in his neighborhood. And I think one of the things that always stuck out to me in that situation is, the his murderer was acquitted. And for me as a Black woman, it was very traumatizing. And
Mm.
because I had so many Black male siblings, it was one of those things where I was like, I will not be a part of the problem. Like I have to be a part of the solution. And so I remember that situation really making me feel like, okay, I need to do more. I need to do more. And still, so as an RA, I started to host like conversations on campus about police brutality and violence against women and things like that. And just really wanted to make sure that I was able to bring those conversations to the forefront everywhere that I could. And so that really brought me into the teaching space. And so I ended up getting a teaching role. And through that role, I was able to participate in some DEI classes. And so that's what really sparked my interest in the field. Because if you asked anyone that was a part of that program with me, like they could never get me to sit still. Like when we had to like do curriculum planning and lesson planning and, that type of stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I would just be running around just talking to people and just trying to hear people's stories and get to know them. But then when we do our DEI classes, I was like, oh my God, this is like so fascinating. This is so cool. And that's what really made me realize, okay, I want to do that. And so I started to really study the person that was teaching those classes and just learn more about the field. And it wasn't really as clear as it is now, I think, on how you can kind of get into that space. But that is really where my passion really sparked for DEI. And then, of course, I ended up at the Center for Employment Opportunities, which is where I am a DI manager now. And that role has allowed me to be able to kind of facilitate training, content, have those kind of deep discussions with staff, and really get to know people on a human level. But it really started from me being as a child and me wanting to understand the world more.
What you just said that really resonated with me. I'm sure it did with Katie too. When you say about getting to know somebody on a human level, because we all have our story.
For sure.
We all have our own whatever happened when we grew up, or certain things where we are all people and human, and
Mhm.
it's understanding one another that actually makes the world a better place.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it's like essential to like us being able to operate together
Mm.
as a species. I've always been one of those people that believe that we're all connected in some way or somehow, and we all have a responsibility to one another. And so if
Mhm.
I don't know you and I don't seek to understand you, then I can't support you. And it doesn't really serve me to only focus on my own individual needs. Because I could walk out my door today and see somebody who is homeless, experiencing homelessness, and in my mind, I just left my home where I'm comfortable, where I have food to come back to, where I have, heat and air to come back to. And so for me to just drive past that person and not have any level of empathy or seek to understand how I can support, to me, that does all of us a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think empathy might come to certain people easier than others, though. I don't know whether it's a innate thing or how you're brought up, but some people find it a lot easier to put themselves in somebody else's shoes, which I think is really important
Mhm.
in everything you're saying.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't know the science behind that, and I won't pretend I won't pretend to. But I think that the thing that has helped me, and maybe it'll help someone else, is recognizing that I'm a very flawed and imperfect person. And so, any situation where I feel like I may start to judge someone else, I can think of 4 or 5 situations where I've been in a similar circumstance, right? Or I haven't made the best decision. And so, for me, it's one of those things where the more that I can see myself, the more that I can see other people.
For sure, because you never know someone else's circumstances. So it's always best to just kind of try to help rather than to try and impart like a judgment, I feel like.
Absolutely.
So as a job coach and retention specialist, you helped formerly incarcerated individuals find employment. I'm really curious, can you like share with us some of the standout things you learned during that time?
Yeah. So again, when I first started at CU, I was not our DI manager. I started off working as a job coach and retention specialist, which means that I was supporting like resume prep, mock interview prep, working with our participants to just get prepared for kind of like those first initial steps to enter the workforce. And then on the retention side, once they did find employment, just checking in, making sure they were doing okay, supporting any needs there. Some of the things that I found in that circumstance was just the challenge of navigating the system. We have this belief that if once someone leaves jail or leaves prison, that they are done with that system, and that is very untrue. They still have a probation or parole officer that they have to report to. They still have court requirements. They may have fines and fees that they still have to pay off, and those things still impact them in their life on a day to day, right? And so when we were searching for employment opportunities for our participants, one of the challenges we found was that the good paying jobs usually were at factories or, and or places that were a little bit farther out than like the downtown area. And so if you have someone coming out of prison or jail and they don't have a driver's license, that's going to just present an initial barrier to finding sustainable employment. And then outside of that, trying to get back on your feet, find an apartment and furnish that apartment and, put food on the table for yourself or maybe even for your family. That's going to be difficult if you owe those fines and fees, or if you owe back child support, and all those things could still put you back in jail or prison. So it's kind of like this cycle, this never ending cycle for people who are just trying to get out of survival mode, trying to move forward in their lives and push ahead. And I had to develop a certain level of empathy for where people were and remove this expectation that you need to do what I think you should do and focus on how can I meet you where you are and help you do what you need to do. And so that was one of the biggest perspective shifts for me is really decentering myself and really focusing on, or I should say, decentering what I felt like my expectations should be for my clients and really focusing on what they needed from me. And so that was one of the biggest things I learned during that time. And also, of course, everybody has something to contribute. You know, we are all gifted and talented in many ways. And so just trying to find ways to help people and support them in showing and exercising those gifts. One of the things that I tried to make sure, even when I was teaching, was that if I had a student who was very talkative or very, like, rambunctious, I would not try to diminish that child's light, but maybe just give them something extra in the classroom to do. Here, help me pass out papers. Here, you want to teach the class about this. You want to close us out, versus telling that child, you're too loud. You need to sit down. You need to silence yourself. You need to be quiet. And when I transitioned into CEO, I really took that same kind of perspective and narrative. Like, how can I also help these other gifts shine, right? So we have participants who was interested in working for us. Okay, well, come in the office with me, shadow me. Let's do some meetings together. Let's figure out how you can gain these skills and really show this interest off. We have participants who were into music. Okay, play me a song. Um, we shouldn't limit people to what we feel like we can achieve, right? But just really making sure that everyone's gift and their ability is able to come through in whatever it is that they want to do, or whatever it is that they're aspiring to. And I think for me personally, I've always been somebody who tried to treat everyone the same. Of course, no one is perfect, so I'm sure that that hasn't always been true. But I've always been someone where I treat the CEO and a janitor the same. And I know that sounds very cliche, but it was to the point where I would tell people, like, I don't care what your title is. If you do not respect me, I do not respect you.
Yeah.
I've humbled myself a little bit. I've got to be a little nicer. I don't tell people that anymore. But the reason why I say that is because sometimes we can get so tripped up in titles and roles and positions and leveling that we forget that we're still two human beings that need each other to some extent. There are things that you might do better than me. And if I continue to look at myself as bigger than or better than because of my role or position, then I may not see the same value in your contributions. And that's problematic. And so that was another thing that I've always just tried to lift up in my experience working in any field, any role that I'm in.
For sure, it's all about empowering each other, I feel like.
Yeah. And self-awareness, I feel like that's one thing that I took from what you were saying. It's aware of yourself. If everyone was more aware, I think the world would be a better place, if I'm being strong about it. I think that's
Yeah.
the key part in growth as well, in terms of we can all grow as soon as you become aware in yourself what your strengths, what your weaknesses are. And I think that leads on to my next question, actually, about imposter syndrome, because I'm sure when you were working with people in prisons, they all probably experience some level of imposter syndrome. And I know you spoke about it in 2022 in a TED Talk. So what are your kind of experience with imposter syndrome, and what advice would you offer to anyone striving to overcome it?
The biggest the biggest and best piece of advice I've ever had is, no one knows what they're doing. And that's very true. Literally, no one knows what they're doing. We're all trying to figure it out as we go. So if you are someone who's experiencing imposter syndrome, something that I always say is, ask the person that you're kind of looking to as being an expert and just be like, how did you come to that conclusion? Or how did you make that decision? Walk me through how you got to that, point. Usually you'll find there's very little of a difference between kind of the steps that they took to make that decision, and if they're honest, right? And the steps that you take in your own reasoning and understanding of moving a process or procedure forward. It really just stems from like that awareness and being able to ask those questions. And sometimes just hearing somebody say, yeah, I kind of just made that up. Like, I've had people be like, wow, that was so eloquent and beautiful. Like, how did you? And I'm like, I just ad-libbed that. Like, I felt it and I just went with it, because I want people to know, like, you can be off the cuff and you can still be eloquent and still have a powerful message to give. Everything doesn't have to be scripted, right? But then also at the same time, there's been times where I've had to ask my manager, okay, how did you come to that conclusion? And then, she'll say, oh, I did this and this. I'm like, okay, that's what I was thinking I would have done, but what you said is actually a better way to go about it. And so just being willing to also open your mind up, right? And like adopt other practices and ideas that people may be able to contribute to your own awareness building, as you mentioned earlier. And then understanding that everybody's impacted by imposter syndrome, right? And imposter syndrome is not a one and done. Usually imposter syndrome will reinvent itself, right? Based on where you are in your career and your journey. And for me, imposter syndrome is an indication of greater responsibility. And so once you've been given that greater responsibility, now those feelings of, am I good enough? Am I worthy? Am I valuable? Will come to the forefront. And, we do a training on imposter syndrome at my organization. And one of the things that we always say is, collect those positive experiences. Think about, when have you overcome great challenges? You're talking about people who have experienced some of the worst parts of I would say, our country when it comes to being incarcerated. And so you can overcome anything. But more importantly, like, all of us have been through things in our lives that we've had to really work through, whether it was mental health or grief, family trauma. Like, there's always something that we can look back at and say, I don't know how I made it through that, but the skills and the time I took to really understand what was happening to me and come up with a plan to move forward, that's transferable, in every aspect of our life. And what I would also share is, even within that process of doing the TED Talk, I was experiencing imposter syndrome. So there were many, many, many nights that I called people crying, saying, I don't think I can do this. I don't know if I'm going to make it on that stage, and people who loved me and cared about me, they would call me and they would pour into me, and it gave me a chance to lean on other people. And so what I would also say is, people that you trust to be honest with you and be there for you, those are the people that you lean on. Community is so important when you are trying to overcome great challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I think also, in the whole, humans are actually incredibly resilient. And I don't think we necessarily always think like that, in terms of, we go through things, but you'll still be completely fearful over a situation that could be ahead of you that might not ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd bounce back anyway. But we don't necessarily think like that. I mean, we've all gone through, like you say, we've all gone through loads of things, but it's definitely sometimes imposter syndrome as well. I don't know whether I would have ever thought I've gone through it. Somebody describes what it is to me, and I'm like, oh, I have experienced it myself. Yeah.
Yeah.
So linking back to what you said about like vulnerability and transparency, authenticity is at the core of your work, but societal pressures can often really hold us back from like being our true and genuine selves. So in your experience, what do you think we can do to push back against these pressures and then let our authenticity kind of like shine through and bring our full selves to work each day?
Yeah. So again, something that I like to say is, there is no one else like you, and there will never be anyone else like you. That is a very powerful place to be. And if you understand that your unique beauty, skills, talents, interests, you have those for a reason, then you won't want to fit in, because there's a place in this world that was made specifically for you. So for me, when I think about authenticity, it is very spiritual for me. I've also struggled with identity and self-love, and really being able to pour into myself and see myself as having value, even with all the things I've been able to accomplish. And for me, something that I've started to do is I pray and I ask God to allow me to see myself the way he sees me. And that's a way for me to be able to pour into myself on the days where I don't feel my best. Like, there is a greater purpose for me. And as long as I'm able to remember that and remind myself of that, I'm going to be okay. Right. Another thing I will say is, people can only meet you at the depth that they've met themselves. And so if someone is pressuring you to be someone else, whether that's a job or, that's a family member or a friend, it's usually because they haven't met themselves at that place. They haven't seen the value and the gift in their own unique qualities and capabilities yet. And so I would just say, on a human level, don't internalize that. Because they will get to that place, hopefully, by seeing you step into your own power and you really embrace who you are. And I'll also say that all sounds nice and fine and dandy, but the reality is, we still live in a world where people trying to be themselves can cause tension, right? Especially when I think about the workplace. We always say, we want you to bring your whole selves to work, your full authentic selves to work. But that is incredibly difficult when we have like employee handbooks and employee relations and things where you can get in trouble if you're someone who likes dark humor. Just there are going to be tensions that exist when you're trying to kind of mend and mesh together authenticity and just like normal social norms, workplace kind of expectations, and that tension will always exist. And so, how can you push through and ask questions and advocate and find people within your organization that can help push those narratives forward or change perspectives on certain things, right? And also just think about where can we make changes to create more space for different identities and authenticity to shine through. And for me, I have the opportunity to work with affinity groups. That's a space where we can do that. All of our affinity groups really focus on like authenticity and bringing people's different identities and experiences to the forefront, whether that's race or whether that's gender or whether that's someone's parental status. Like we have that thing working for us where we're really trying to consider how to support everyone in their own unique way, even though we're not perfect. But there are even small things that people in organizations could consider, like, for example, retreat clothing. Anytime I go to a retreat, I have to consider as a Black woman, will what I wear be considered inappropriate? Right. And so that's an experience that I have that is very unique for me and for a lot of Black women. And so even something as small as, can I get with some other Black women and think about, hey, can we make this language more clear so that if someone were to try and say that, we know that we still have a level of protection around how we get to show up and how safe we can feel being in that environment and really being business casual. So there are small strides that can be made through just having conversations with other people, seeing if there are connections in your experience, and just making sure that you're kind of encouraging space to be made for alternative thoughts and beliefs, even within that clothing narrative, right? Like, are we labeling clothing as male and female attire, right? Like even something as small as that, or is it just attire? And so just thinking about those small ways that we can create a greater opportunity for people to show up as themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think it comes almost back to communication as well, as how you can communicate things to other people, because we are all human. But often, sometimes, I don't think people are very good at thinking from somebody else's perspective unless somebody explains to them. One question we would like to ask you is, what are some of your biggest challenges you've faced? And do you have like a personal approach or some time, do you take time to yourself or a particular mindset that helps you get through the challenges in particular?
I think some of the biggest challenges I face is one, just taking care of myself. I share this a lot, but when you're in social service work of any kind, you kind of feel indebted to everyone outside of you. And it is important to take time to care for yourself and establish some boundaries so that you have time off or so that you can do things that you enjoy. The problems that exist today will exist tomorrow. We might be able to make little strides, big strides even, but really making sure that my cup is full and I'm like pouring into myself is something I've really had to do better with. I would say also recognizing again that I'm a flawed and imperfect person, and one mistake doesn't take away everything that I've done and who I am as an individual. That one has been really difficult for me because when you are in a role like the one that I'm in, and then also being a Black person, one mistake feels like the mistake of everyone that looks like me. And so I think sometimes I can carry that weight of, I have to be perfect. I have to get it right. I have to do it right. And that's just impossible. It is literally impossible. So something I've had to work on for sure is just being gentle with myself, understanding that I'm not perfect and I don't know everything, right? It's like the more that you know, the more that you realize you don't know. And so being willing to admit when I don't know, to take the time to get the knowledge and understanding that I need to grow and develop as a person, and being okay with that, and not letting it change, again, my perspective.
And I think often we're it's, you have to be able to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, then you can't, support other people. But one thing I think is that we're really good at giving other people advice and being really lenient with other people, but then we don't apply that to ourselves because we think that we're not important, we don't matter. The other people, they do, so we can like help them. But then when it comes to kind of like being kind to yourself, you just don't really connect in that sort of way. But it's really important to be able to, just like you say, be more gentle and more lenient with yourself, for sure.
Definitely. Like, we don't forgive ourselves for not mistakes, sounds like a strong way of saying it, but it's high standards for yourself, and other people are looking at you going, what do you mean? Like, you've done a great job, or you've done this, and you know it's not good enough. It's not good enough. I need more. And they're going, whoa, okay, I think you're being incredibly harsh on yourself, but it's just what we do, isn't it? High standards for ourselves, and then other people, it's easier to be more kind of forgiving.
And I think the way that I look at it is it's not bad to be hard on yourself necessarily, because it shows that you have a deep passion for change and growth and self-development. And that is something to be proud of, to really want to be better, because you recognize that the more that you grow, the more that you can support other people. But I think for me, what I had to learn is perfectionism, and this wanting to be perfect, this needing to show up a certain way. I was modeling for people around me things that were not going to be productive and make them successful either, right? So if I'm showing up on days where I'm supposed to be on vacation, what am I telling the people around me that they need to work on their time off, And so I had to ask myself that. And that's something that I do now, especially as a manager, is if I'm noticing a trait or I'm noticing a behavior, and I ask myself, like, why is that person doing that? Before I go to, oh, we need to train them or we need to talk to them about this, I say, well, what have I modeled for this person? Like, am I modeling for this person right now or in a past experience that this is the way that they should show up? And then if I can pinpoint those moments, I'm like, okay, I need to do better. Right. And like you all said, like, it's easy for us to focus on all these external things, but sometimes we got to take that time to focus on us and really think about what it is that we're doing to perpetuate this narrative. And so, yeah, it's not even with my own family. Right. And so, like, when I started to really open up to them during that time that I was kind of preparing for this TED talk, I realized, like, okay, I haven't been honest and vulnerable with the people close to me about the things that I deal with and experience. And so now I'll be on the phone with them, just, oh, just life, and da, da, da. And they're like, what is happening? She's breaking, like, what is going on right now? But it was me trying to protect them from essentially the world, right? Like, wanting to show them that you can do it, you can triumph, you can overcome, but it was so unrealistic. And so when they would go through things and oh, I didn't tell you because I didn't think you would understand. I'm like, what? That happened to me 4 years ago when you was a baby. I learned that in me being more open and vulnerable about the things that I experienced, like, me and my family's relationships became more humanized as well, like more realistic as well. And I never want to model for anybody that I love that perfectionism is the way to the way to go through life, right? Like, we all go through stuff, and that doesn't make anything in your life bad or make you bad. It just means that you have a new challenge to overcome, a new experience to adopt.
I think often something that we're coming up with at EP is that people are saying how young people today are looking for leaders who maybe are a bit more vulnerable, who can show that side. But obviously, there was probably the opposite side of that years ago, where leaders didn't show a vulnerable side to them. That would probably be viewed as a weakness. And it's almost like spun itself on its head. So I'd be interested to know, you probably think it's a great thing to show vulnerability as a leader. It shows actually a form of strength through vulnerability, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm very big on admitting when I'm making an assumption. I think if people did that more, they would realize how much they assume, which again heightens that sense of self-awareness. I'm also really big on admitting if I make a mistake or if it was an oversight on my part. I apologize. I will say I'm sorry. If I feel like my tone was off in a meeting, or if I feel like I didn't handle a situation the best, I'm not afraid to say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I see myself and I just want to apologize for the way I showed up in that meeting. Because people can feel, I believe like we can all feel and understand each other's energy. So who am I to think that I don't have to take accountability for how I make you feel? Like I have to take accountability for that. Um, and I have to be able to show that I am, again, I'm not perfect. And make sure that we can all understand that as a community, that we don't get to change, again, striving for perfection. We get to change by going through the motion and the strife and the challenges and the tension. Like those are the things that bring communities closer together.
On the flip side of some of the challenges that you mentioned, what do you think have been some of the more resonant and rewarding moments so far?
Yeah, so I love facilitating, I love training. And for me, some of the best moments have been, having somebody come into a training and be resistant to the topic. And then when they leave, they're like all excited about it and happy and wanting to learn more and asking questions, because it shows that something was done in that space. Something was done in that space to spark change or at least spark curiosity. And so those have been some of my most rewarding moments. I remember I facilitated a training years ago, and it was for a group, and the group was majority white, majority male. And I remember by the end of that training, someone was like, well, before we start to do any type of strategy planning, we need to get some more diversity in the room. And that was something that I didn't have to say. I was like, oh, okay, they figured it out. um, and wanted to say, okay, we need more diverse voices. Like we need to hear from some more people before we start making decisions as leaders. Those aha moments that people have. I love that. I would say another great success that I've had has really been, again, just taking care of myself and allowing myself to grow in this journey very authentically and be able to make those mistakes and recognize where I do need to grow as an individual. Yeah, I would say definitely those things.
Mm-hmm. And is there one thing in your journey that you think if you told people it would surprise them most? Like people would go, really? Something that you find that shocks people?
So I technically, um, my first few years of my career really didn't have any formal like training experience, like creating training, creating content. I didn't go to school for that. I went to school for sociology and criminal justice. And so my whole family's like this. We're very creative people. We learn through doing, we learn through seeing. And so again, when I used to study and monitor and watch these other DI professionals like create these spaces, for me, it was all about the feeling. Like what feelings, what type of emotions were they creating and cultivating in that environment with strangers to get them to open up and to work together and talk together and want to understand each other more and push perspectives. That was always the feeling that I was going for when I would build training. But it wasn't until probably the last 4 years of my career that I started to like learn about different training models and really think about how to embed, incorporate those training models into my work. So even though I think for a while I saw it as a deficit, I still see it as a strength, because understanding how to create and cultivate that emotional experience for people is still important. But understanding how to build that skill set for long-term success in the role is also important. And so again, when I came to that decision, imposter syndrome, all the things, but I was like, no, I can do this. And I started to just work more on building up my knowledge and awareness in those areas. And even now, like I just ordered a book on the Kirkpatrick model. And, I've always been a lover of learning. And so it's not something that I like hate to do or don't like to do. I love to learn and read and understand more. So it's one of those things where I've had to get more serious about it. But yeah, like it was not something that was in my kind of formalized educational training.
I feel like that's quite normal, though. I mean, we all learn on the job, as they say. I mean,
Mhm.
Katie and I said to each other earlier that every day is a school day. And I think
Mm.
my parents used to say that to me because we all learn something in a day. You might not necessarily make that kind of direct association, but we do. There's always knowledge all around us, and it's having that mindset to go, I want to improve, I want to learn more, and, keep pushing yourself forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
What role do you think storytelling plays in DEI?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling is, for me, it's all of it. It's most of it, right? It plays a huge role in understanding perspectives and experiences, because no one person can hold the collective experience of every single person that exists, right? You can have a version, but you can't have the full experience. You know, I shared this with you all outside of this space, but I personally am somebody who experienced the criminal legal system. I have a misdemeanor on my record, and I never spent a day in jail. I didn't have a public defender. I was able to pay for a lawyer. And so if I went into that space feeling like, oh, I get it because I went through this and I understand, there are so many nuances to my experience, even privilege, I would say, in my experience, that had I held so tightly onto that, I wouldn't have been able to help my clients the way that I was able to. And so I have a perspective of what it looks like to go through that system. And it's not to diminish my own, because it was a very hard experience for me, but I don't have all of it. And so storytelling, I think, helps us shape these different versions and these different narratives, so that we know, okay, I know what it's like to walk this life, but I also know what it's like for someone to have that experience, or to have that tidbit of trials or tribulations come into play for their kind of like journey. And being willing to say, I may not have had that personal experience. I may not have come to that same conclusion, but I understand why you did. Right. And I think it goes back against that self awareness and suspending judgment piece we were talking about earlier. The more you understand a person's why, the less judgmental you should be, because you can empathize with, yeah, based on those different things, I would probably have, I at least understand why you made those decisions. I probably would have done the same thing. And so storytelling to me is so important when you talk about training and you talk about growing and developing leaders.
Even as individuals, we don't know how to tell our own story very well. It's just such a key life lesson in terms of how to tell a story or how to explain things to other people. But yeah, we would like to also ask you about a little bit about your own company, and your role as a CEO. How would you just kind of describe the ethos of your company?
Yeah, so again, early in my career, I started to do like more training and just like put myself out there. And so folks will come to me and say, hey, can you like help us out with a training? Or just in general, I've always been someone that you could bounce ideas off of. And so outside of my amazing organization that I work for, I also do like some consulting and coaching work. After kind of being in this space for a while, I felt like I wanted to make sure I could solidify my kind of place and really give folks a chance to really get to know me and understand me in a way that was very personalized. And so, of course, you all know, but my organization, my business is called Soul Labor. And so, labor is really just a community. That's how I would describe it. It's about creating spaces for people to love on and share with one another. So, you all talked about that storytelling piece, which is so important to me. So whether that's through training, coaching, event planning, or through my podcast, Soul Labor Speaks, I understand the importance and value of hearing someone's story or opinion, and in an environment that can feel safe and challenging at the same time, because love is both safe and challenging. And so that is what I would say really describes my business and my focus. You know, as a DEI professional, I'm all about, let's make sure people have the right language and, understand the terms and the concepts. But I'm also like, okay, but how are you doing? And so I really feel like this is a space for me to be able to lean into both of those areas for me.
So with that in mind, what kind of changes would you like to see an influence when it comes to DEI training and implementation within the workplace?
Yeah, so we all are, I mean, over here on this side, we are experiencing some interesting times, I will say. And so some things that I've personally been thinking about is making sure when we do say DEI, we're very clear about what that means and who that is for. So we talk about that community and collective piece. Can everyone see themselves in the work that we're trying to accomplish and achieve? Even though we know that there may be, or there are disparities that exist for certain groups. So being really clear about what we mean when we say DEI is something that I think we could do better. I also think having a collective message So for folks who are against DEI in the practice, one thing that I have started to study and notice, and still have some of my other counterparts, is, there's a very clear and specific message. There's a lot of coalition building. And so I would love to see folks in DEI space just come together more, talk to each other more, and bring a more clear, united front on how we talk about the importance of our work. I think the other thing that I would like to see as well is recognizing that creating safe spaces don't mean in those spaces you won't be challenged. This is something that I've personally tried to make sure that I talk about when I'm doing training, right? And so there's a difference between a fact and an opinion, right? And so within your opinion, in your perspective, you have to be open to being challenged, again, because you want to make sure you have those different versions and narratives to be able to bring into your own collective understanding of what's happening. And so that's something that I think we could be more clear about, that if you're in a space and someone is asking you to share more, or someone is saying that they don't agree, that it doesn't mean that they don't care about you or that they don't understand you. And so really making sure that we do a better job of that, I think would help with kind of some of the narratives that come to play with folks saying that DEI isn't community focused, or, is divisive, right? Like in general, in any and every field, it only grows and develops with the difference of perspectives, really helping us shape, whether it's a new research article or it's a new theory. Over time, these things are supposed to shape and grow and develop how we do our work better. And so we can only do that through conversation.
Yeah, I really like that. What you said about safe spaces doesn't mean you shouldn't be challenged. I think that's definitely a key takeaway for me from our conversation today. I think we've asked you quite a few questions, Destiny, haven't we? You probably need a drink of water, considering it's only 10 to 9 in the morning for you.
Yeah. No, it's been great though. I really appreciate it. I
It
really
has been
do.
really, really great to talk with you today. So thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. It's been great to speak with you.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
enjoyed that. All of your insights. I mean, I know you're in America, but I think there seems to be a lot of parallels with things going on and things people are talking about. So it's always nice to hear that there's a lot aligned in certain kind of keywords that we've been saying. So yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been really
you.
fascinating to learn about all the ways we can shift our thinking and be more open and honest with our authentic selves, and to forge more impactful and empowering connections. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it.